How can you see if somebody's going live or not? Okay.
All right, I think our audio is better now.
Hopefully. Hopefully.
All right, let's wait for some people to get in here.
Ah, there it is. I had to refresh. Sweet. Very nice.
Yes. All right, sometimes turning it off and turning it back on.
Yeah. Very
Max
good.
that started after the screen share. You know what? I could see why that could happen. Now that I've correlating that to what people on the internets have said that I was reading there.
Oh, gotcha.
So we're not going to share your screen anymore, Dustin.
Oh, that's fine. I can understand. My screen is quite choppy.
Yeah. Well, I think it's with the device.
Choppy waters.
The input from that.
Don't worry, we'll still be able to talk.
Is at a different bit rate than what I'm outputting as, and so
yeah.
I just need to go in and disable that. So
makes sense. No worries. So we can still talk permissions.
Well, I can always share my screen, which is not via the
you still should
the
have
external device.
Yeah, you still should have access to all the different commands, even on Windows too.
Oh, I am SSH'd into.
Oh, right.
All right,
Yeah.
so let me.
So you're on an actual server environment as opposed to a desktop environment, like I am.
Yes.
It's very nice.
All right. Thank you for the patience, everyone. But like I said earlier, I've been doing Windows development recently, and truly, sometimes turning it off and turning it on again is the solution.
Live troubleshooting, right here.
Yep.
See it here first, folks. Turn it off, turn it back on again. Unplug it, plug it back in.
It says I need to fix the error. Is it looking good still on your end, Dustin?
I mean, yeah, I look fine.
Why? Well, all right, we're just gonna keep going with it. YouTube is complaining that video.
I was gonna say I don't see you sharing yet, but that also could be the delay.
Oh no, I didn't start sharing yet.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah, I mean, looking fine.
All right.
Over here.
Let me go move this over. So Dustin, I honestly was not paying attention while I was debugging that. Where did you get
no worries.
to?
So we were just talking about change own. So talking about changing ownership, talking about changing groups. We talked about UMask already. We talked extensively about change mod, and we had some questions about that, I think.
Okay. So change mod, changing the permissions. I think did you talk about don't do 777?
Yes,
okay.
A little bit briefly, but we can always reiterate.
Yeah. So if you're running into permission problems, the answer is not 777.
Every single online forum will tell you change it to 777, but
Yeah,
they also are,
don't want to
breaking the rules by doing that.
The reason you don't want to do that is that anybody on the system,
anywhere,
and if you're running a web server, anybody who is connecting over the network has permission to that file.
Yes.
There's other security controls in place that ideally would prevent some of that stuff, but general rule, 777 is not the answer for what for your permission woes. So you talked about change own, talked about change group at all?
No, not yet. I was about to jump in. So so change own is going to be your user and your group, which changes the ownership rights of a file, but change group will just be for your group.
So change group, and you can actually do chown. We could change the ownership and the group with chown with a colon in the middle. I could change this to the web dev group. And now we see that it's web dev. I could also just say, if all I want to do is change the group, you can just use change group, and I can change this back to my ownership.
Yep.
And we can see that it's back to me.
So change group is used less just because change owner is used a lot when you're changing these
I'll
permissions.
sometimes do it when I don't actually want to change the owner of the user. I'll do this in like shared web directories and things like that.
It also helps with group permissions when you're setting up, I'll say, more concrete and exclusive permissions using like SE Linux or something, which we'll talk about later as well. Across a certain group, you might want to set a whole set of files or folders to a certain group that has those additional permissions. So change group has its uses.
So the next thing in here we have is UMask.
We talked about that a little bit.
Okay. So we won't touch too much on it. Honestly, nowadays, UMask isn't really the way that you would go and manage you can use it, and there is valid use cases for it, but typically I'll use what we'll talk about just briefly down here below is set FACL and the extended access control system.
Yep.
And I'm going to breeze over some of that stuff. I'm going to say up to this point, all of these are things that you should definitely get familiar with and understand how they work with the permissions and the groups.
If you remember anything from this morning,
don't 777.
Thank you. Yes. Should be our new logo. Don't 777.
Yeah. We'll need that with the works on my machine sticker.
Yes.
So sudo is used to, actually I'll step back a few steps here. On Linux, when you first set up a new Linux server or a Linux desktop and you're going and creating your user, nowadays you more than likely will be prompted to create your user account. And then during the install process, it will ask you about setting up a administrative password. A root password is what they call it. So ROOT. And the reason for that is that your default user is a non-administrative user. It does not have privilege to do everything. Your root user is your topmost privileged user. It's the administrative user and allows you to do anything. From a security perspective, we briefly talked on this, I believe, in the last the last live stream, is you don't want to run your day-to-day, whatever it is you're doing, running a web server, running your desktop, running Chrome or whatever, as an administrative user. This differs pretty greatly from Windows, where typically when you log in on a new computer, your user that you create is the administrative user.
Yep.
There are other controls on Windows to prevent you from really messing up. There's all those prompts that you get that, like, are you sure you want to do this? There could be a security risk, but people just typically click yes.
Yes. See more info? Nah, not today.
Yeah, just yes. On Linux, you would just get a permission denied, and that's the end of the story if there's something you can't do. And if you want to go and perform something as the administrative user, you would use a command called sudo or sudo. Sudo or sudo, depending on how you pronounce it. I say sudo. I don't know if I've ever written
sudo.
Sudo. I'm gonna start saying sudo.
Go for it.
But sudo is a longer version of su. So su is the command to switch users, and so the default behavior of su when you run it is to log in as the root user. But if all you want to do is run a single command as the root user, you can do switch user do, hence the sudo, and by default it will run it as the root user. And so this would allow you to go and run administrative commands. So I could, and I'm not going to do this, I could stop the web server on our server here. I could reboot the machine, because those are all things that as a normal unprivileged user, you typically, at least in a server environment, wouldn't be able to do. In a desktop environment, you might be able to reboot without sudo, but that's not always the case.
I also just posted an XKCD link if anybody's familiar with the online webcomic.
Your links are not working.
They're not working, I know, but if it comes through,
I don't think it's going to come through.
It probably won't. But there's
you should send it to Elijah to post.
There's a good comic out there talking about making a sandwich, and he asks sudo make me a sandwich, and then he's like, okay.
Yes. So sudo, some key things to know about it are when you run sudo for the first time, it's going to prompt you for your authentication. I'm not going to log in here right now. Actually, I'll go ahead and log in. In my case on the server, we have two-factor set up for it. So I need to.
Token.
Now I am the root user. I have administrative. You can see that it changed my username there on the left-hand side.
It's pretty good. The GoTo Raptor comic is pretty good.
I have not seen that one.
Yeah, that one's pretty funny.
And then I can just exit out of being the root user. If I didn't actually want a sudo shell, I can run sudo who am I, and it'd say root, versus when I run who am I as my user, it just says I'm Julio. So after about 5 minutes or so, it'll time out. You have to retype in your password. So like I can run sudo who am I without a password right now, but it will reprompt me after a while, just from security, and that might be different on each system you work on. So sudo is good for doing administrative tasks. Dustin alluded to earlier that if you don't understand permissions, it's very sort of the easy button sometimes is, oh, I'm just going to use sudo to do it because I got a permission denied. That isn't always the answer. Sometimes you want to tune the permissions because you need to have access to something as your user, or you should have access. Something like if you need to go and use your var HTML directory where you have all your websites and things like that. If you're doing like PHP or HTML.
Well, I would say the other use case that I see on a day-to-day basis is the Docker group. So if you're installing Docker and trying to use Docker in a Linux environment, one of the optional steps, which I find should be highly recommended and actually more of a required step, is setting up a group for Docker privileges and then adding your user, not the root user, your specific non-root user to the Docker group. And what that allows you to do is run Docker commands as your user, as otherwise you'd have to run it as sudo docker and run it as the root user. So it's kind of an easy way to set up Docker permissions across all users on the system is if they're in the Docker group.
Yep.
So that's something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. Not necessarily setting up the group per se, but running Docker and using Docker on my development environment.
Yep. So sudo is another thing where you're going to use it. You're going to need it for sure. But don't have it be the Band-Aid solution for every problem you run into.
Yeah.
Same as 777. You don't want to just use that whenever you get a permission denied. You don't want to just do sudo.
It'll end up solving the problem, but probably not in the best way
But
possible.
introduce other ones that you might not be aware of.
Security being foremost.
Yep. So the next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is systemd sysvinit. So when you're running a Linux server or just Linux in general, and even really any Windows or Mac, you need a way to go and run background processes. So the primary, again, one here is a web server, but there's plenty of other use cases, your database servers. Those are kind of the two big ones that I can think of off the top of my head that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so in Linux, the old way, and it's still on some systems, is using sysvinit, which you would use the
service command.
Yep, you would use the service HTTP stop or start, and then there's also the etc initd files. But nowadays, most operating systems, CentOS 7, Ubuntu, I believe. I think even the Arch Linux last time I installed that forever ago.
Yeah, it was using systemd. Now, granted, in most of those systems these days as well, they'll still have access to the service commands or the service style commands. But most likely they are being aliased to the system control or the systemd commands.
So learning
it's
systemd,
backwards compatibility.
Yeah, systemd is going to be the best thing to be familiar with. The other stuff you're probably not going to use all that much.
Yeah. It's better if you haven't ingrained those habits. It's better just to get in the habit of using the newer commands.
Yep. So the newer system is called systemctl or system control, and it is very similar except it's systemctl start HTTPD, stop HTTPD, whatever your service name is would go in that third parameter. And so we can go and see status HTTPD. We can see that our web server is running here. And since this is our development server, sorry guys, I'm going to go ahead and stop this. We can go and stop. We can see that status now, it's no longer running. And I can start it back up. So when you're doing local development, this is an important thing to do, in that you should be, when you restart your laptop, you might not have your service running. So my favorite commands start with systemctl status and then whatever thing I'm trying to use. I can tell you like Mongo, you need to check your database.
Yeah.
On Windows, you have the service manager, service manager?
Task manager.
Not task manager.
Yeah, it's separate. You're right.
Services is what it's called. And then on Mac, typically what we use is Brew. Brew has a Brew services. It's the same concept there. If you have some sort of daemon that's running in the background that you can start, stop, check the status of stuff. So for things that you need running in the background.
Yep.
So
getting to my favorite commands.
Woo-hoo. What's that? Oh, top and H-top?
Yeah. H-top's pretty.
Yes. So
I got a bunch of my coworkers to start using H-top as well because we were
H-top is far better than top.
Yeah. Well, they didn't even know about top. And I was like, you guys, you don't even use top. Use H-top. It's much better. Human readable top.
So yeah, we have a note in here about checking your services when you're starting a server. If you're trying to debug like why the web server is not accessible, your database isn't running, check why make sure that it's running in your service.
Yeah, and we're glossing over a little bit of the troubleshooting and debugging of some of these background services, but we do have a later module that talks about that. Especially when we're talking about those background services and using like journal CTL to get into the actual logs of the services. But we'll talk about that in I think it's the troubleshooting Linux topic.
So as Dustin was alluding to, probably the first one to talk about is top. The reason you should know top is it's on pretty much every, it's default. And so you open it up and every second or so, it's configurable. It will update the screen with what your top running processes are. And I'm sure there's ways to go and use it. I'll be honest, all I look at are the values that are up here at the top, making sure that I'm not overusing it. But on all the servers that I administer, you use the button Q to get out of that. On all the servers I administer, I install what's called HTOP, which is the prettier version.
It's colorful.
So if you want people to think that you're a hacker and you're working away on stuff, just open up HTOP in the background and it will update with all the colors and black text and black background. And so you can see the number of processes that are running.
So I'll use this as well when I'm running, if I'm running concurrent builds on my environment for whatever reason. If I have like two different, I'll say, development builds running, I'll sit here and just watch HTOP just eat up all of my RAM and eat up all of my CPU as it's churning through the two different builds.
So, and you can go in here and you can use the F keys down at the bottom. You can do sort by. We can do sort by memory. We can sort back by CPU percentage.
This is also good if you're trying to figure out what's going on or why your system is like really slow, for example. You can see what's running at the top and what's eating up all of the bandwidth on your system. Whether it's memory intensive process, whether it's something that's taking all the CPU. But it's just a very nice command that
it visualizes it a little bit better than top does.
Yeah, and it gives you a lot more features when it comes to I'll say a user-friendly way. Top has a lot of background options and things that you can turn on as you start it, but it becomes a little harder to understand if you're not familiar with it or jumping into it. And again, the man pages for top are very good. HTOP just
for all these things, the man pages are always good. I would always recommend checking them out. So you can do man top, and it will go display all the manual for it. You can go look through it and read through the options. But I'm lazy. I like HTOP. I have plenty of commands to remember, and HTOP, I don't have to remember anything. Next sort of command that you will more than likely not use in most cases, but it's good to know that it exists, is a thing called IOTOP. And I actually don't even have it installed on the server because it hasn't been an issue. IOTOP is very similar to HTOP in top in that it monitors your IO performance versus top and HTOP are monitoring your CPU and memory performance. So I'm going to say the next two commands are probably some of my favorite for debugging that I use pretty frequently.
And not every developer knows about them either, which is fun.
So netstat, and everybody uses a slightly different set of flags for it. I use ANTP.
NLTP is what I use.
You use NL?
NLTP, yeah. So again,
And
just slightly different.
yeah. And so what this does at the long or the short is that it will show you what ports you're listening on and what application is bound to those ports. So we can see on port 27017 that our Mongo process is bound to that. We see that SSH is bound to port 22. We see that Docker's on 9112. And so it's very useful to see, like if you see something in your systemctl that it's running, you say system. We see that HTTP DD is running, but we can't get to it. Well, let's check to see if it's actually listening on the port that we need it to. And if we look here, we see that it's on the global IPv6. So that also means that it's on
443.
Yeah. Well, 80 and 443.
Yeah.
Down here.
Yep.
So SS is the alternate command. And
I think the options and flags are very similar, if not the same.
Yeah, I use ANTP for both of them. And that this is just a different way of viewing it, and it's the systemctl version of it.
Yeah.
Another utility to investigate sockets. So it's all for looking at what sockets are open, what programs are bound to those sockets.
What's listening where
Yep.
on the system. Yep.
We have a thing about run levels in here. I'm going to breeze through that. It's important if you're debugging like a server or your desktop, but for most developers, you're not going to typically use this.
It's become less and less important over time, I think.
Yep.
As
the high level concept behind run levels is kind of, if you think of it in Windows, is like you can boot into safe mode. Same concept for Linux, where you have your normal run mode, which is typically going to be 5 with a GUI or 3 without a GUI. There's also run level 1, which is single user. That's when you're needing to recover your root password because you forgot it.
Yep.
And then, so there are a couple others there. Not going to really get into that. I will say if you're taking some sort of security test or some sort of certification, sometimes they'll ask you these things, so it's important to know what they are, that they exist.
Study the information for the test you're taking more so than know
this
this offhand.
This has not too much applicability unless you're a system admin and you are dealing with debugging systems that aren't booting. But nowadays, it's not that often that I think in my career, I've had to go and use an alternate run mode 1 or 2 times. The biggest one is switching from graphic user mode back to command line only mode.
Yeah.
If something's bricked on someone's like Linux desktop.
Yeah, it's exceptional cases for me as well. The 1 or 2 times I've used is when I've messed up my own like dual boot of Linux and things weren't booting. I'd had to if the desktop environment wasn't booting correctly, I tried to switch back into a non-graphical mode just to try to get it to work. But that's been, I think, like you said, the 1 or 2 times as well. So it's very rare that I have to use that.
I don't use this command ever. I actually don't even know what it is. So I'm going to skip over that one.
Okay.
Get FACL.
That's your favorite.
This is very useful for describing extended attributes.
So we talked about permissions.
Yeah.
The default file permissions being that read, write, execute. These are extended permissions on a file, and they don't show up in that ls command that we were using, the ls-l that Julio is now using as well. I'll say they do show up, but you can't see all of the information in that command. You have to go and use the get facl command to understand all of the different attributes on that file. If you find a file, Julio, I know you're looking for one.
I am. So this is for one of our websites. So you see when you do an I have ls-la to go see everything here.
Yep.
You see that there's this little plus here at the end. And that tells me that there is an extended attribute on it. So if we run get facl on any of these files, we'll do the directory classes. We can now see that in addition to Elijah being the owner and the group for it, and that the owner and group have read, write, execute, because this is a directory that's expected, we can see that there's also another group that has read, write, execute on this, the web dev group. We also see that Jin was the default user. He probably created this originally. And at some point, Elijah overwrote the file. And so what getFACL allows as a system admin to do, again, as a day-to-day developer, you might not have to deal with this, but as a system admin, it's critical to understand this, is that you can go and add multiple sets of groups with different permissions, and also for default files. So we talked about UMass not being as applicable or useful. It is still very useful, but typically the way that I handle this is through extended attributes and the default permissions that get applied to a directory or to a file. This allows me to go and set what user or what group, or in this case, the web dev group, has access to these files here. So
yeah, it's harder to do that through UMass because you have to.
Well, that's for permissions, not for groups and assigning.
Right. It's not quite
access.
as powerful.
Yep. So getFACL, if you run into a permission problem, I'm not going to dive too in depth about how to set these, again, because it's more of a system admin.
I think we talk about it a little bit with troubleshooting, potentially.
Maybe. The big thing for this is just knowing that if you see this little plus sign, there's some sort of extended attribute on it, and you can run getFACL to see what the extended attributes are and to see if that's why you're not getting a permission access to it. So
very nice.
With that in mind, that is all that we've got for today, I believe. Dustin, is there anything else that I'm missing here?
Off the top of my head, no, but if there's any commands that you guys would like to see, feel free to post them in the chat. We'll take a look at them here as the double A comes through.
Any questions?
We've got plenty of time this morning too, so if you guys have questions.
Dustin has all morning. Dustin's.
Yeah, I got nothing going on.
Yep.
I'm here for you guys today.
Yes. And yeah, so if you guys didn't already, make sure to, I'll put the attendance back in here.
Yeah, since we switched.
Yep, just to make sure.
Yeah.
But I think I got most everyone. I gotta go get the link.
Oh, I think, going back to our editors versus IDEs, I know we talked a little bit. I think you said that with you being in the Windows environment more often these days, you're using Visual Studio. I didn't actually say what my
VI.
Yeah, I just use VI.
Weird flex.
Yeah, weird flex, but it's funny because my entire team on my project, they use a multitude of different tools as well. So we've got the Gambit. Yeah.
Alexander, yeah, you can, the previous stream that was messing up at the end should already be listed on YouTube on our channel.
Yep.
And this one will be available, so you can always go back and watch through it. So I think now that everyone confirmed that it was due to when we started doing the screen share, I know exactly what the problem is, and we should be able to resolve that so it doesn't happen again in the future.
Yep. Live and learn.
Yes. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can leave a comment on the channel here. You can also shoot an email to info@exerceo.org. Reach out to us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all of the social media links. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Yes, please.
Like and subscribe.
If you're not seeing it, Alexander, let me go. Maybe it needs to be listed. I will fix that right now.
Yeah. But yeah, my daily runner these days has been because the way that my development environment works, I get to log into a server. So I'm using tmux, which is a different command. It's a terminal multiplexer, which allows me to open
smash that like button.
multiple screens at the same time and be able to all view them in one window. And then I use VI on top of that, so I can open multiple files and cut and paste and things around using VI. And that's also just my day-to-day job. I'm on a couple different projects, so I have to switch contexts a lot. And it's easier to do that than having to open an IDE all the time and have it, slowly open all the files very slowly. So
now, if you have a lot of resources on your computer, IDE can be
we're a little constrained as well. Unfortunately, my development environment is not too beefy, but so that's product of the environment.
Yep, YouTube's telling me that if I leave this screen, it's going to end the stream. But I will make sure that both streams are listed here, Alexander, so you should see them momentarily. So let us know. Reach out if you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you guys for all attending and dealing with our stream difficulties.
Yeah, thanks for being very
understanding and patient.
Yeah, and jumping
I know how
in
bad
and,
poor audio is. It bothers me to no end. So, all right, have a great rest of your weekend, and our next class is what next
Saturday? Weekend. Yeah.
Next week.